it's Kathy, and welcome back to another edition of Sunday Praise at Kathy's Happy Home. And today we're going to continue on in the book of Esther, and it's Esther chapter 4. And the title of this chapter is Esther's Decision. First, we're going to talk about Mordecai's mourning because he and the rest of the Jews are upset about the fate that is awaiting them. So in verses 1 to 3 of Esther chapter 4, it says, When Mordecai learned all that had happened, he tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and ashes and went out into the midst of the city. He cried out with a loud and bitter cry. He went as far as the front of the king's gate, for no one might enter the king's gate clothed with sackcloth. And in every province where the king's command and decree arrived, there was a great mourning among the Jews, with fasting, weeping, and wailing, and many lay in sackcloth and ashes. We hear people talk about putting on sackcloth and ashes when they're very upset about something. This was a way that they showed their mourning. Sackcloth was like what they made flour sacks out of, burlaps, and it was a rough material. It wasn't a fine material like silk or things, something like that would be. And ashes on their heads, the ashes from the fire, and this would be a way that people would know that that person was in mourning. Maybe they had lost a loved one, but in this case they were mourning the fact that they were about to be killed. And although Mordecai was anguished at all of this, we remember also that his integrity was the cause of it, and he would not change his mind and grovel at Haman's feet to save himself or his people. This was his personal integrity. He was somebody that we can really admire, but he also knew the character of the Persians, that once a decree was made, that it couldn't be changed. And there was a great mourning among the Jews. Mordecai's reaction was imitated all over the Persian Empire in public expressions of grief and horror. So Esther's maids and eunuchs came and told her, and the queen was deeply distressed. Then she sent, this is verses 4 to 7 of Esther chapter 4. So Esther's maids and eunuchs came and told her, and the queen was deeply distressed. Then she sent garments to clothe Mordecai and take his sackcloth away from him, but he would not accept them. Then Esther called Hattach, one of the king's eunuchs, which he had appointed to attend her, and she gave him a command concerning Mordecai to learn why this was, what and why this was. So Hattach went out to Mordecai in the city square that was in front of the king's gate, and Mordecai told him all that had happened to him, and the sum of money that Haman had promised to pay into the king's treasuries to destroy the Jews. So Esther's living in isolation in the palace, and she doesn't know any of this stuff that's going on. And she hadn't been aware of this decree before, but now she understands the decree, and but she didn't understand before, and she couldn't understand why Mordecai was making a spectacle of himself. And in verses 8 to 12, it says, He also gave him a copy of the written decree for their destruction, which was given at Shushan, that he might show it to Esther and explain it to her, and that he might command her to go in to the king to make supplication to him and plead before him for her people. So Hattach returned and told Esther the words of Mordecai. Then Esther spoke to Hattach and gave him a command for Mordecai. All the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that any man or woman who goes into the inner court to the king who has not been called, he has but one law: put all to death, except the one to whom the king holds out the golden scepter, that he may live. Yet I myself have not been called to go into the king these 30 days. So they told Mordecai Esther's words. After giving a copy of the decree to Esther through her courier, Mordecai challenged her to intercede on behalf of her people before the king. But any man or woman who went into the court, inner court to the king, who hadn't been called by the king, he had one law to put all of them to death. Esther explained the difficulty behind this request, and she was only allowed to come to the king when he called for her. And if she came on her own, she could be executed for daring to approach the king without an invitation. Apparently, the life of the Queen of Persia was not one of great intimacy with the king, because she says it's been 30 days since she's seen him. She hasn't seen her husband for an entire month. And then Mordecai has a second request in verses 13 and 14. And Mordecai told them to answer Esther, "Do not think in your heart that you will escape in the king's palace any more than all the other Jews. For if you remain completely silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. Yet who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this?" Mordecai reminded Esther that she couldn't remain enslaved from this decree any more than anyone else could. And his trust was in the faithfulness of God, not in the faithfulness of Esther. He knew that God would not let his people down, even if individuals let God down. Mordecai reminded Esther that though the fate of God's people rested on God and not on her, her own fate depended on her faithfulness to God. Mordecai knew that God had promised this orphan in exile for a reason, and Esther must have the courage and wisdom to see that reason and fulfill it. But this principle applies to us also. God promotes us or puts us in a place for a reason. Sometimes we'll get a job that we didn't expect to get, but there's somebody there that needs to be told about God. Maybe there's some place that we're going to live that we said, "Oh no, I'll never move there." But God puts us there, and he puts us in different places for a reason, and sometimes for a season too. And Spurgeon said, "I believe that in dark times God is making lamps with which to remove the gloom." Martin Luther is sitting by his father's hearth in the forest when the Pope is selling his wicked indulgences. He will come out soon and stop the crowing of the cock of the Romanish Christ-denying Peter. John Calvin is quietly studying when false doctrine is most rife, and he will be heard of at Geneva. A young man is here this morning. I do not know whereabouts he is, but I pray the Lord to make this be an ordination sermon to him, starting him on his life work. I feel as if I were Samuel at Bethlehem, seeking for David to anoint him with a horn of oil in the name of the Lord. God has us in certain places for certain reasons, and you may not understand it. You may not see it in your lifetime, but God has a reason for putting you where he puts you. So now we talk about Esther's decision in verses 15 through 17. Then Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, "Go, gather all the Jews who are present in Shushan, and fast for me. Neither eat nor drink for 3 days, night or day. My maids and I will fast likewise, and so I will go to the king, which is against the law, and if I perish, I perish." His way, and did according to all that Esther commanded him. So, taking the determination of the Lord, Esther decided that she would go and make a bold appearance before the king, but first she wanted to be supported by prayer and fasting. Jesus reminded us that special spiritual battles require special preparation with prayer and fasting. And regarding a stubborn case of demonic possession, he said, "This kind does not go out except by prayer and fasting." And we read that in Matthew 17, verse 21. And then Esther says, "And so I will go to the king, which is against the law, and if I perish, I perish." Esther carried a bold attitude towards her mission. She was determined to be obedient no matter what the cost. And Jesus told us the same thing. Do not fear those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul, in Matthew 10:28. And Paul also tells us this in Philippians 1:21. He says, "To live is Christ, and to die is gain." And that's where we're going to stop today. And I will see you next week with chapter 5 as we continue in the book of Esther. Thanks for watching.